All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back.
Hey.
Future diplomats out there,
Oh,
history
yeah.
buffs, anyone who's ever kind of scratched their heads and said, wait a minute, World War I, wasn't that supposed to be the war to end all wars? What happened? This deep dive is for you. Today, we're going to be focusing on the road to World War II.
Yeah, that's a good question.
And obviously this is a very, very dense topic, tons of books written about it, but we're going to try to distill some of the key insights from our source material today, especially for those of you out there who are prepping for the UPSC exams and have international relations as your focus.
That's good.
All right, so let's jump right in. Let's set the stage. World War I ends. We have the Treaty of Versailles, which is supposed to usher in this era of peace. And then, well, a couple decades later, we have World War II. So what happened? What went wrong?
It is fascinating. It's like we don't learn our lesson, did we? Even after the devastation of World War I, all these factors came together to kind of pave the way for another global conflict. It's really quite sad when you think about it.
Yeah, it's like history is like, hold my beer, watch this.
Yeah.
So let's break this down. Our source material, it dives into a few key areas here. And kind of the starting point, you have to talk about the Treaty of Versailles, the peace, the very shaky peace that was created after World War I.
Yeah, and the Treaty of Versailles, as ambitious as it was in terms of, trying to create a lasting peace and a new world order, it ended up being a bit of a paradox. It tried to reconcile the idealism of a liberal world order with the realities, the harsh realities of punishing Germany for its role in the war.
So it's almost like they were trying to create a utopia while simultaneously settling scores.
Yeah, and was that the best approach? In retrospect, it's very easy to say no. But at the time, I mean, who knows? Who knows what the alternative could have been.
Right.
But, the treaty imposed heavy reparations on Germany, stripped it of territory, included the infamous war guilt clause, forcing them to accept full responsibility for the war. And, while this was intended to prevent future aggression, it really fueled resentment among the German population and, destabilized the Weimar Republic, which was the new government that was set up in Germany.
Now, you talk about adding insult to injury.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how do you rebuild when you're constantly being reminded of your past and punished for it?
So, I'm curious from a realist perspective, how do you think this impacted the power dynamics in Europe? Because obviously that's a huge part of, understanding international relations.
Yeah, so, realist theory, as you know, emphasizes the role of power in international relations. And from that lens, the victors of World War I, they were kind of blinded by their pursuit of this liberal world order. They arguably overlooked the importance of a stable balance of power in Europe. And by weakening Germany so drastically, they inadvertently created a power vacuum and a fertile ground for extremist ideologies to take root.
So essentially the Treaty of Versailles, aiming for peace, it's ironic because it might have actually made another war more likely.
Yeah, it's a very complex issue. There are historians who argue that, the treaty was necessary to hold Germany accountable, but the unintended consequences were significant as we saw.
Right.
And this is something that happens often in politics and international relations. You have these well-intentioned policies, but sometimes they have unforeseen and detrimental effects.
Yeah, the law of unintended consequences always seems to rear its ugly head. All right, so we've got a fragile peace in Europe. And then, to make matters worse, the world gets hit with just a massive shock.
The Great Depression?
Yeah, the global economic crisis, the crisis of the 1930s, it was like throwing gasoline on an already smoldering fire. You had mass unemployment, you had poverty, a widespread sense of despair, and this created perfect breeding ground for extremist movements that promised simple solutions, scapegoats for complex problems. It's like a textbook case of how economic hardship can radicalize people and make them susceptible to those extremist ideologies, right? Exactly. And this is where the rise of figures like Hitler and the Nazi Party in Germany. This becomes really crucial to understanding the road to war. Germany is already grappling with the humiliation of the Versailles Treaty. Right.
And they were particularly vulnerable to the appeal of a charismatic leader who promised to restore, national pride and prosperity.
So it wasn't just, the economic crisis created hardship,
Yeah.
but it also really eroded trust in those democratic institutions.
Right.
And kind of paved the way for more authoritarian forms of government.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the internal political landscape. The crisis also led to a wave of protectionism and economic nationalism.
What?
Countries turned inward, started focusing on their own self-interest, and this further fractured international relations undermined, any attempts at cooperation.
Mm.
So you can see how this was, really setting the stage for the conflicts to come.
Yeah, it's just, it's a recipe for disaster. We've got, a shaky peace treaty. We've got a global economic meltdown, and then you have the rise of extremist ideologies.
Right.
This is not looking good. It's not a good start to the 20th century, the early 20th century.
And it was a perfect storm.
Mm-hmm.
It was a perfect storm, and this brings us to the very controversial question of Nazi Germany's role in the outbreak of World War II.
Right.
And, historians debate whether Hitler's ideology was the primary driver of German aggression or whether opportunistic factors, played a larger role.
So this is where, for those of you out there who are prepping for the UPSC, this is the meat of it.
Right.
This is where it gets really interesting. So let's dive into this Nazi enigma, shall we?
Yeah, let's do that. So,
yeah.
We know that German foreign policy under Hitler became increasingly aggressive.
Right.
You had the Rhineland reoccupation in 1936, the annexation of Austria in 1938, the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia in 1939, and finally, the invasion of Poland that same year, which officially marked the beginning of World War II. So.
Right.
Each of these moves was pushing the boundaries further and further, testing the resolve of the other European powers.
It's almost like a calculated game of chicken.
Right.
Like each move is escalating the tension.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And this is where the arguments for and against Hitler's ideology as the main driver, this is where they come in. So on the one hand, you have Nazi ideology itself with its roots in, social Darwinism and extreme nationalism.
Right.
This fueled a desire for territorial expansion, for racial dominance. They believed they were destined to rule, to reshape the world according to their vision, which was quite twisted, to say the least.
Yeah. So basically they believed that they were destined to rule and to reshape the world in their image.
Exactly. And this ideology provided a very, very powerful justification for their actions. But then there's the argument that geopolitical factors and the legacy of, German unification, they also played a significant role in shaping Nazi foreign policy.
So maybe it wasn't just ideology. Maybe it was also about, Germany's position in Europe, their desire to reclaim lost territory and kind of assert themselves as a dominant power again.
Exactly. So, perhaps Hitler's ambitions, they were fueled by a combination of ideological zeal and a very, very shrewd understanding of the geopolitical landscape at the time. It's a complex debate. Both sides have compelling points. I mean, what do you think? Which argument do you find more convincing?
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack for sure. And we haven't even gotten to, it's not just about Europe.
Right.
We have another major player on the other side of the globe, Japan.
Absolutely. And while all of this is unfolding in Europe, you have Japan's growing power and imperial ambitions in Asia, which are also critical factors leading up to World War II. And in many ways, Japan's position, it mirrored that of Germany before World War I. They were a rising power, challenging the existing world order.
And just like Germany, they started making some bold moves.
They did. In the 1920s and 30s, Japan occupied Manchuria, established the puppet state of Manchukuo, and formed the Anti-Comintern Pact with Germany and Italy, signaling their alignment with the Axis powers. So these actions really demonstrated their growing assertiveness and their willingness to challenge the status quo in Asia.
So forging alliances, expanding their territory, sending a very, very clear message that they are a force to be reckoned with. What was the reaction from the other established powers like the UK, the US?
Well, these actions, they led to growing tensions with the UK and the US, who had their own interests in the region, and this competition for resources and territory. This created a volatile situation in Asia with the potential for conflict escalating, very, very rapidly.
And then, of course, we can't forget about the infamous attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, which that brings the U.S. fully into the war.
Yeah, the Pearl Harbor attack, it was a calculated but ultimately disastrous gamble by Japan. They aimed to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet and solidify their dominance in the region. But instead of achieving their objectives, the attack really galvanized American public opinion against Japan. And this led to the U.S.'s entry into the war, which ultimately sealed the fate of the Axis powers.
Talk about a miscalculation.
Right.
It seems like Japan, just like Germany, they underestimated the consequences of their actions.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to kind of see how both countries, despite being geographically so distant, how they ended up on the same side of this conflict.
Yeah, and their alliance really highlights the complex interplay of ideology, of geopolitics, of economic factors that contributed to the outbreak of World War II. The road to war was paved with many, many different stones, but the actions of Germany and Japan were undoubtedly, key catalysts that propelled the world towards this global conflict.
And as we explore the course of the war itself, we'll see how their ambitions ultimately led to their downfall.
Right.
But that's a story for part 2 of our deep dive.
For next time.
For now, it's just fascinating to kind of consider how events on opposite sides of the globe can, converge to create such a devastating conflict.
It's a sobering reminder of how interconnected our world truly is, and how seemingly isolated events, can have global repercussions. The story of World War II is it's a tapestry woven from, threads of ambition, of ideology, of economic turmoil, of diplomatic failures, all culminating in one of the deadliest conflicts in human history.
Yeah, and understanding those threads, that's essential, not just for acing those UPSC exams, but for anyone who wants to grasp the complexities of our world today.
Absolutely.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be diving into the war itself, talking about some of the major turning points, what led to the defeat of the Axis powers. So stay tuned. All right, so we've set the stage. We've talked about the Treaty of Versailles, the Great Depression, the rise of aggressive powers like Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. Let's dive into the war itself. What were some of the turning points, and ultimately what led to the defeat of the Axis powers?
Yeah. Well, while many factors contributed to the outcome of World War II, I think 2 really, really stand out.
Okay.
And that's the involvement of the Soviet Union and the entry of the United States, these 2 superpowers with their vast resources and manpower. They fundamentally altered the balance of power in the conflict.
Right. So let's start with the Eastern Front. Germany's decision to invade the Soviet Union in 1941. That seems like a pretty bold move, perhaps a little reckless.
It was a gamble, and it ultimately backfired.
Yeah.
Hitler, driven by his ideological belief in Lebensraum, living space for the German people, he vastly underestimated the resilience of the Soviet people and the Red Army, and this invasion dragged Germany into a grueling 2-front war, stretched the resources thin, and exposed them to the harsh realities of the Russian winter.
Yeah, I mean the conditions on the Eastern Front, it must have been absolutely horrific.
Yeah, it was one of the most brutal theaters of war, in human history. Millions of soldiers and civilians, they perished in the fighting.
Yeah.
And the scale of the devastation is it's unimaginable. The Battle of Stalingrad, which raged for months in 1942 and 1943, that became a symbolic turning point in the war. It was a devastating defeat for the Germans, and it really marked the beginning of their long retreat from Soviet territory.
So Stalingrad, it's often cited as this major turning point in the war. What made it so significant?
Well, Stalingrad was really it was a clash of ideologies. It was a battle of attrition fought, street by street, house by house, and the ferocity of the fighting and the sheer determination of the Soviet defenders, it ultimately broke the back of the German army. It really shattered the myth of, German invincibility, and it demonstrated the Soviet Union's, unwavering commitment to resisting Nazi aggression.
So the Eastern Front is this, major drain on German resources and manpower. But what about the Western Front and the role of the United States?
Right. Well, the U.S. entry into the war in December 1941, following the attack on Pearl Harbor, this was a game changer. The U.S., with its industrial might, its vast resources, they tipped the scales in favor of the Allies. They provided crucial military and economic support.
It's just amazing how this one event, that seems so isolated, Pearl Harbor, how it could have such global repercussions. Pulling the U.S. into a war.
Yeah.
On the other side of the world.
It speaks to just how interconnected, global politics had become by that point. Pearl Harbor, it galvanized American public opinion, and it transformed the conflict into, a truly global war. The U.S. mobilization effort was unprecedented. Factories were churning out, tanks and planes, ships, at an astonishing rate, and this influx of resources, coupled with, the manpower provided by American soldiers. This was crucial, turning the tide against the Axis powers.
So you've got the Soviet Union, who's grinding down the German army on the Eastern Front,
yeah,
and then you've got the U.S., who's coming in and providing this industrial and military muscle that's needed to really secure victory in the West.
Precisely. The combined might of these two superpowers, it proved too much for the Axis powers to overcome. The D-Day landings in Normandy in 1944, for example, that was a testament. That was a testament to Allied cooperation and military coordination. It really showcased the overwhelming force that they could bring to bear against the German war machine.
It's interesting how both the Soviet Union and the United States, despite their ideological differences, how they ended up fighting on the same side against this common enemy. What does that tell us about the nature of alliances and global power dynamics?
Well, it highlights this concept of realpolitik in international relations.
Right.
Sometimes shared interests and shared threats, they can override ideological differences, and this can lead to unlikely alliances. And in the face of Nazi aggression, the U.S. and the Soviet Union, despite their, contrasting political systems, they recognize the need to set aside their differences, to cooperate, to defeat this common enemy.
It's a reminder that even in the midst of conflict, pragmatism and strategic considerations,
yeah,
they can play a crucial role in shaping alliances and determining the course of history.
Absolutely. And this alliance, while temporary, it ultimately reshaped the global order, leading to the emergence of a bipolar world,
Yeah.
dominated by the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
So the defeat of the Axis powers, it wasn't just about military victories. It also had profound geopolitical implications that shaped the world for decades to come.
Right. It's crucial to understand these interconnected layers of World War II. You have the ideological clashes, you have the economic factors, the military campaigns, and the resulting geopolitical shifts.
Yeah.
All of these layers offer valuable insights for anyone seeking to understand international relations, particularly for those preparing for the UPSC exams.
Absolutely. I mean, this is not just ancient history. This is really the foundation for understanding the world that we live in today.
Right.
And speaking of today, I'm sure a lot of our listeners out there, especially those UPSC aspirants, they're thinking, okay, So what? So what are the key takeaways for me?
Yeah, yeah, good question.
Well, for those of you, studying international relations, first and foremost, you have to understand the causes and consequences of World War II. This is essential. This is a case study in how, global power dynamics can shift, how ideologies can fuel conflict, and how seemingly isolated events, they can have these cascading global effects.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder that history isn't just a collection of dates and battles. It's a
Yeah.
very complex web of interconnected events that continue to shape our world today.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So for our UPSC aspirants out there,
Yeah.
it's not just about memorizing the dates and the names. You really have to understand the cause and effect relationships, the motivations of the different actors, and the consequences of their actions.
Absolutely. Yeah. You should be able to analyze primary and secondary sources, evaluate different historical interpretations, and really form your own informed opinions on these complex issues.
And don't forget those all-important theoretical frameworks.
Right.
We touched upon realism, but there are other theories out there like liberalism, like constructivism, that offer these different lenses through which to view these events.
Right. And understanding these theories is really essential for developing a sophisticated understanding of international relations. They provide tools for analyzing, power dynamics, the role of institutions, and the influence of, ideas and norms on state behavior.
So it's about, connecting the dots, seeing the bigger picture, and
Yeah.
and developing those analytical skills that you need to navigate the complexities of
Yeah.
global politics.
Right. Exactly. And these skills are valuable not just for exams,
Right.
but for anyone who wants to be an informed and engaged citizen in today's world.
100%. All right. So before we sign off here, let's leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question, something to ponder as they continue their deep dive into history and international relations.
I like it. Let's do it.
Knowing what we know now about the causes of World War II, what lessons can we learn about preventing future conflicts in an increasingly interconnected world?
It's a question that continues to resonate, today as we face new challenges, from rising nationalism to the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. The echoes of the past, they're all around us, reminding us of the fragility of peace and the importance of vigilance, of diplomacy and understanding.
It's a call to action
Yeah.
for all of us. To learn from history's mistakes and to work towards a future where these devastating conflicts are never repeated.
Well said. Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the road to World War II. We hope you found it insightful, you found it engaging.
And we hope it inspires you to continue, exploring the complexities of our world, past, present, and future.
And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with anyone who might find it valuable. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Keep diving deep.